Hey, what are you doing? It's 2024. You don't have to do that anymore. Here, let me show you. Whoa. See, ain't that cool? In 2021, Myst got another remake. The first Myst remake, called Real Myst, released in 2000 and featured updated 3D graphics rendered in real time, allowing for an unprecedented level of freedom in this iconic world. Finally, players could look at this thing from this angle. But Robyn Miller, one of the creators of the original, still wasn't happy with this version. A lapse of reason and directionless, he called it. Definitely not how we originally envisioned Myst, he continued, a direct contradiction to the game's marketing. The next time they'd take a crack at bringing their world to a new era of gaming, they'd finally do it right. And in 2021, the long-awaited Myst hit the store shelves. At long last, the culmination of almost 30 years of iteration, the Miller brothers' true vision for Myst, offered to the masses for the paltry sum of 35 USD. I'm obviously building up to a letdown here. The game is aesthetically a step backward. It's far more detailed and gritty, to the detriment, in my opinion, of the original's unique presentation. Everything has the kinda gooey, smeary texture that was ubiquitous in games built in Unreal Engine 4. Lighting effects were improved, but colors are less saturated, reducing overall visual clarity. Live action footage is swapped out for 3D character models and they are nasty looking. Newly recorded sound effects are mixed in with older, lower fidelity ones, resulting in an uncomfortable soundscape. If you asked me to describe the original in a word, I would say dreamlike. This one, muddy. I may be being overly critical right now, and the game is still good, it's still Myst, but I just don't agree with Robyn Miller at all. How can this be how you originally visioned this? It just doesn't make sense to me. Well, as it happens, he might have had a similar thought. I suggested in my last video that no one played Riven, but that can't really be true because games that no one played don't get remakes. For simplicity's sake, I am from this point on going to refer to the original Riven as Riven 97 and the remake as Riven 24, reflecting the years they were released in. I may also spoil more puzzle details in this video than I did in my previous one, as it's kinda difficult to make comparisons when you can't really talk about what you're comparing. Now, with that all being said, Riven 24 is really f***ing good. The look of the game is immaculate, details lovingly and painstakingly recreated in this fancy new real-time 3D world, visually capturing the soul of the original and setting it free in the modern era of game technology. This can't be anything other than the original vision for Riven. I mean, look at it. Deja vu abound. This is what I mean when I say Robyn Miller may have also thought that the Myst remake didn't really look like the original, because with Riven 24, they clearly shifted a ton of their focus to creating not merely a technically, graphically advanced version of Riven, but Riven itself, the world of Riven that always existed, just in a new form. Of course, this is also a technically, graphically advanced version of Riven. You can now walk around freely, animations occur in real time, there's an epic visuals setting, so like, yeah, this is some pretty high-tech stuff. But unlike Myst 2021, these visual upgrades never seem to exist for their own sake. They're here in service of the world to make it more striking, more engaging, more immersive. And this capability for increased immersion is used to tell more of Riven's story. Riven is falling apart. The 5 islands, historically a single landmass, have been drifting further and further away from each other. This slow, gradual event is unobservable during the relatively short time you spend in Riven, but it's conveyed through occasional earthquakes, tears in the fabric of reality, and crumbling infrastructure. I didn't do that. In my opinion, everything they did to visually upgrade Riven for the modern era was an unambiguous improvement. Oh shit, I have to talk about the character models. It's really hard to accurately portray a realistic looking human being in 3D software. Just ask Robert Zemeckis. Expectedly, the human characters are where Riven 24 runs into the most jank. In 1997, using live action footage for the in-game characters was really the only option they had for a game that looked this real. Like, imagine a Virtua Fighter character giving a long-winded monologue in Gen's pristinely rendered workshop. It would be bad. Likewise, it wouldn't make much sense for Cyan to use 2D footage of real actors in a 3D environment, even though they did it in Abduction, but whatever. So they did the sensible thing for Riven 24 and used 3D character models, and they are rough. A massive step up from the models in Myst 2021, but not even close to the level of, say, Rockstar or Naughty Dog, and goodness knows I don't expect that level of fidelity from games with much smaller budgets, but it doesn't make it any better, it just makes it easier to accept. All the changes I've talked about so far have been superficial, stylistic, but don't take that as me trivializing them. It's just that a lot of the changes made to Riven go much deeper than that. The structure of the game has remained largely unchanged, but 2 of the 3 main puzzles have been fundamentally reworked. The functions and functionality of some systems have completely changed. A couple new areas with their own challenges have been added, and new lore was written to go along with them. Changes like these run the risk of causing confusion or even outrage from fans. But Riven 24 manages to thrive in this balancing act of reinventing its puzzles without losing the soul of the originals. So let's take a look at them and see how these changes have affected the Riven experience. The first big change a new player is likely going to run into is the function of the spinning domes. No longer are they locked behind a code, nor do they house linking books to Gen's secret age. No, instead, they hide portals to a great big starry void. That's interesting. Long story short, the domes in Riven 24 are a kind of fast travel network. Each dome you find on the surface of Riven becomes another destination for this system. I really like this. Fast travel is a convenience that much bigger games use to cut out long periods of just getting from one place to the other, and they often take the form of a menu. In Riven 24, you, as your player character, have to manually operate the fast travel mechanism. This change gives the spinning domes a much greater presence than they used to have, and allows them to tie into the fire marble puzzle more explicitly at the relatively minor cost of them no longer remaining this weird enigma for most of the game like they were in Riven 97. Changing the purpose of the domes also lets you interact with Catherine before you even start the first puzzle. This might seem like a pretty minor change, but consider that in Riven 97, you are utterly alone with essentially zero guidance for the majority of the game. You still are for most of Riven 24, but just seeing a friendly face right at the start of the game, one that points you toward an objective, it's some much needed encouragement in the face of Riven. So those are some changes to the beginning of the game, but what about the meat of it? How have Riven's puzzles changed? Well, you read the title, they're way easier. Rand, Robyn, and Richard must have watched my last video because they addressed the exact problems I brought up with the animal and marble puzzles. But they didn't do it the easy way, just throwing in more hints or pointers or whatever. Both these puzzles were totally rebuilt, making sure not to lose the essence of the originals and doing the impossible by just making them make sense. And puzzles that make sense are easier to solve than puzzles that don't. The changes made to the animal puzzle are really interesting because there are more steps, more pieces, more mechanics, but it's also more streamlined, and that has everything to do with how it presents itself. These totems are the direct replacement for the wooden eyes from Riven 97, and this lens that reveals otherwise invisible paint is the replacement for, I don't know, your ability to discern that this is a frog. Riven 24 has the confidence to just show you the symbols you're supposed to use. One could argue that this change makes the puzzle too easy, to which I say, why do these chunks of wood make animal noises? Using these totems and invisible paint offers two benefits. One, the much larger totems are easier to discover than the wooden eyes, which allows for the symbols to be hidden behind their own mini-puzzles. And two, by associating the totems, the paint, the lens, and the symbols with each other, it becomes much clearer to the player that these are all part of the same puzzle, which in turn makes this puzzle much easier to understand, but no less mysterious. But discovering the symbols is only half the puzzle. Figuring out their order is still pretty tricky. In Riven 97, you just had to figure out the dunny numbers, but in Riven 24, you now have to translate those numbers to a different number system, one that only the moiety rebels know. Now you might be thinking, oh, another number system? How creative. But I think it makes sense. If the rebels want to keep their actions secret, they should use a cipher unknown to the people they're rebelling against. The cool trick they pull here is that the rebel numbers are a little easier to figure out than the dunny ones, so there is a chance that you could logically deduce which symbols mean which numbers. And if you're a huge fan of the original like myself, and you already know the dunny numbers, it's still fun to translate them into the rebel ones. And that's one of the things I love about how they handled this remake. By reworking the puzzles, it offers new challenges to returning fans. They tried doing this in Myst 2021 by adding puzzle randomization, but if you know how to solve a puzzle, the solution being random doesn't matter. The process of solving it can't be changed. Cyan going out of their way to create new puzzles for Riven 24 that are of the same stuff but not the same as the originals is really remarkable in my opinion, and is the ideal way to handle a Riven remake. The Fire Marble puzzle is a lot less recognizable in Riven 24, but still somehow maintains the essence of the original. You still have to put marbles on a grid, but the marbles have changed, the grid has changed, and the steps you take to get there are almost entirely new. First of all, there's a lot more hubbub made about these fire marbles. They're much bigger and you interact with them a lot more before you get around to using them in the puzzle. There's a completely new sequence added for Riven 24 where you discover the source of the fire marbles. You actually dig up and extract a crude marble from the ground, and it becomes a vital piece of the puzzle, emphasizing the point that Riven's puzzle pieces are literally parts of the world. Then you read Gen's journal and discover that it's been rewritten for this game, putting a greater focus on the process of discovering the power that fire marbles can hold, providing context for and tying together everything you've done with them so far. Side note, there's an achievement you can get by just staring at this marble polisher for 15 minutes. I wonder if anyone's gotten this achievement by accident. Now you still have to figure out which islands are associated with which colors, but there's another layer to the puzzle in Riven 24. Each color is now associated with a number, and you have to figure out what that number is. This is the replacement for the dome code from Riven 97, and you only need to input it once, thank goodness. But figuring it out requires more than just translating dunny numbers. This time, it requires simple arithmetic. Math suits itself perfectly to puzzle games for obvious reasons, so I really like that they hid this code behind a little math problem. It makes me wonder why Riven 97, a game obsessed with numbers, didn't actually have any math in it. Maybe it's because figuring out that the dunny count in base 25 being a requirement for learning the code was already a bit much to ask. You see, unlike Riven 97, Riven 24 is kind. It wants you to win. This puzzle still has everything that made it fun to solve, but lost the stuff that made it ridiculous. The grid is now 5 by 5. You only have the option of placing 5 marbles. All the pieces for this puzzle, the marbles, the symbols, the colors, the numbers are more obviously connected. Like I said, Riven 24's puzzles are easier, and that's not a bad thing. The last puzzle, the one about capturing Gen, freeing Catherine, and signaling Atris, plays out largely the same. The Gen and Catherine steps are completely unchanged, which is fine. There wasn't anything egregious about how they were handled in Riven 97, and you can even go outside in Gen's Secret Age. It doesn't really add anything except a little bit of storytelling, but like, why not, you know? It's nice. The Atris step is the same. You still signal him in the same way, it's just that the mechanism you use to do it has changed. And that's fine. I don't think there was anything wrong with how they did it in Riven 97, but this ties back into what I said about the animal symbol puzzle. Changes like these don't affect the experience of new players at all because they have nothing to compare them to, and they provide returning players with different but spiritually identical challenges, giving them the opportunity to solve Riven for the first time again. And I love that. I've been heaping a lot of praise on Riven 24 because I think it deserves it, but I know there were some people who were less than pleased with this remake. The gist of the problem, as far as I can tell, is that too many changes were made to make the puzzle easier, thereby making them more obvious and less organic. And I totally understand that. When a game is presented as a remake, it's reasonable to expect an exact recreation with fancy new graphics and quality of life changes. But that's not what Riven 24 is. It's almost a new game, and that's disappointing to some. But I think an exact one-to-one recreation of a game is a bad way to handle a remake, especially if it's of a puzzle game. The fun in playing a puzzle game comes from starting with no knowledge, gaining knowledge, and then using that knowledge to come up with solutions. That's why I think they're a lot less fun to replay. And I think if Riven 24 was just a carbon copy of Riven 97, returning fans would run into that exact problem. But I'm kinda dodging the issue, aren't I? So is Riven 24 too easy? No, the puzzles are still tricky. How Long to Beat has the game listed as taking about 9.5 hours at the shortest, which is a solid length for a puzzle game like this. And it communicates that getting to the end is still pretty tough. That doesn't mean the puzzles aren't easier, which they are, but Riven fans have to remember that they're easier still to them. The curse of knowledge applies to every fan of the original. Returning players start the remake with a baseline acquaintance with Riven that new players just don't have, which inevitably skews the remake's perceived difficulty. Okay, so what about the other part of the issue? The puzzles being less organic, less integrated with the world, sticking out as though there were neon signs saying, "Hey, this is a puzzle piece, write this down." Well, I think there might be some cognitive bias going on here as well. Once again, new players have no frame of reference for changes, whereas with returning players, they are predisposed to notice changes. That means what is just a part of Riven's world and likely a puzzle piece to a new player is a change for the new game and obviously a puzzle piece to a returning player. So I've been dancing around the simpler reasons why someone might not like Riven 24, and those are just good old-fashioned gatekeeping and nostalgia goggles. Both of these reasons almost certainly apply here, but attributing someone's distaste for a new thing to just that is too shallow of a take for me. There are 58.8 quadrillion reasons why someone might prefer one thing to another. In my case, I was never going to like a Riven remake more than the original because my emotional attachment to this world comes from the original. When I first played Riven 97, my prefrontal cortex was still soft and squishy, so it had a bigger impression on me than a remake almost a decade and a half later could ever have. That doesn't mean I think Riven 24 isn't worth your time. It is 100%. But that's because I attribute so much of its quality to the incredible work that was done on Riven 97. Remakes, by their nature, are derivative. They can't not be. But that doesn't make them an unworthwhile endeavor for their creators or experience for the audience. Granted, of course, that the creators can come up with a convincing artistic argument for their existence. The argument for Riven is plain as day. This world deserves to be observed more closely than it ever has before. It deserves to be expressed through modern technology, technology that allows for a new depiction of Riven that is both more beautiful and less restricted. That's exactly what I hoped for this version of Riven, and it's exactly what it is. Easier or not, I can't be disappointed. It's fun to just get lost in Riven all over again. And that's all I wanted. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching this video. It really does mean a lot to me. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe if you want, and feel free to leave a comment about your opinions on Riven, the remake, the Myst series, or anything really. I enjoy reading and responding to comments. Anyway, I am planning on making videos on the rest of the Myst series, and eventually branching out into other games and media as well, so if that's something that interests you, I'd love for you to stick around. Alright, see you next time.